Okay, we're going to go on to part 2 of chapter 2. Switching gears just a little bit, keeping in mind we want to develop strategy. And for these, the rules are we go from English, reading it carefully, putting it into an algebraic equation, solving the equation, and seeing if our results make sense, and to give an answer statement. Now, two consecutive integers. We had said that if this is a 7, and a consecutive integer would be 8, that if 7 were x, how would we write 8? Well, we said we would write it x plus 1. These would be an algebraic way of writing consecutive integers. So our equation for this one would be x for the first known or unknown one, and then x plus 1 for the second consecutive integer, and we're saying that is 135. So we group like terms. This is going to be 2x. We're going to subtract 1. This is 134. We're going to divide both sides by 2. That's going to give me 67. So that's my first integer. So what's the next one? Well, it's 67, 68. Now remember, they ask you for the two integers. And if you add these up, you get this. This would be the work needed to support your answer statement and the needed equation to solve 14. Now for number 15, read it carefully. A mechanic charges $50 an hour plus parts. If the bill was this much and it included this much for parts, how many hours did the job take? Well, what I've done is I've worked these out already, because trying to do them cold like you would when you're taking a test, you need to pause, you need to reflect, you need to read them again. And I'm not going to do that part for you. I'll just show you what I've done. So we know it's $50 per hour. What we don't know is how many hours. So 50 times we don't know how many hours, plus the cost of the parts, that will equal his total cost. And there's your equation. It's not too difficult here. I had a little something jump up there. Anyway, we're going to subtract 150 from both sides, and we get 50h equals 300. Now we're going to divide both sides by 50, and we get h equals 6. Now again, that's your solution to this equation, but let's look at the question they're asking. How many hours did the job take? And it took 6 hours. You always want to give your answer statement, and it does fit in there nicely. Now for example 16, we have a lab with a 20% acid solution and a 50% acid solution. They want to know how many liters of each, when you mix them together, is going to give you 600 liters of a 30% solution. This is a typical mixture problem. Now, some background. As we mentioned in earlier lessons, when we have a known amount and we want to divide that known amount into two quantities, we're saying this is going to represent 600 or 25 or whatever amount they give us that we want to divide into two parts. We're going to say X is one part of it, and what's the other unknown part? Well, it would be 600 minus X. This is the way you've worked in your practice and quiz me's to divide something into two unknown parts. So what will your equation be? Well, we have to identify these parts. We're going to say the X is the 20%, and this one is going to be in parentheses, will be our 50%. And eventually we're going to have 600 liters of 30%. And that's where our equation comes in. So 20% of X plus 50% of 600 minus X, we're just taking it right from our little chart here, is going to equal eventually 30% of 600. Now, I don't know if you can see what's going on here, but this is the typical kind of equation that is generated from this type of problem. 20% of part of this, 50% of the other part, mixed together is going to give you 30% of 600. You have used or will be using algebra to solve what could be a kind of a tedious problem. Now, what's the first thing you're going to do? Well, get rid of your decimals by multiplying every term by 100. Now, this then gives you 20x plus, this is 30,000, minus 50x equals 18,000. Now, I did this before on paper, so I'm not doing all this stuff mentally here. I kind of want to make it short, but show you the process. So I'm grouping like terms. I get a negative 30 here. And I subtract this from both sides. I get a negative 12,000. Going to divide both sides by a negative 30, and I get 400, a positive. Now, what is this saying here? Well, it's saying of my X value, which was the 20%, I'm going to need 400 liters. Now, what will be the 600 minus X? Well, that's going to be 200. And if X is 400, 600 minus 400 is 200, and this adds up to 600. And we used algebra to figure it out. Wow. Now, what we're seeing here, I set this up a little bit. Two trains are leaving in opposite directions, and we're wondering how long is it going to take for them to be 300 75 miles apart. So we're using our distance formula. Distance equals rate times time. Well, we know that one train is going at 65 miles per hour. We don't know how many hours, so we'll call that T for time. Plus, the other train is going 60 miles per hour in the opposite direction for the same amount of time, which is T. So there is basically distance equals rate times time. That's this much distance. And then we add this much distance, rate times time to it. So to solve this, we then say 375, add these two together, and this gives us 125t. Divide both sides by 125. T equals 3. So this is a nice, sort of an easy one here. But this is the pattern and the thinking that goes into it. Okay, let's go on. Now, here they're just asking us to substitute these various values for pi, 3.14, for volume, this and that. Let me set it up for you. So all I've done is taken the information they've given me and put it into the formula. This is V, this is pi, this is R that we're going to square. So this is going to end up as a 9 here. And I can cancel the 3 and there goes once. 3 will go into there 3 times. So I'm left with multiplying 3 times pi gives me 9.42. H is the letter we don't know. So we're just going to divide both sides by 9.42. And that's what H will be. And it comes out to about 6. It's actually a long decimal after the 6, but we can round it off to 6. And that's an approximate value. Okay. Now for number 19, here they just want us to solve for a particular letter B. So first thing we're going to do is isolate the B term by putting the 2A on the other side. I'm just transposing the 2A term to the other side. Just change the sign. And now I want to get B by itself, so I just divide both sides by 2. And B equals this. Now we want to solve for H. So we're going to divide by those things we don't want, since these are all factors, by LW. This way the L cancels out, W cancels out, and we get H equals A over LW. Okay, again, there's lots of stuff, but again, you work on your mastery by doing the practice. Now, as we move into inequalities, remember all of the skills needed to solve equations are the same for inequalities. The only thing different is if you ever have to multiply or divide by a negative, and I'll show you this one more time. 2 is less than 4. And if we multiply that by a 2, This becomes 4 is less than 8. That is still true. But if this were a negative 2 that we're multiplying both sides of an inequality by, this then becomes a negative 4, and this becomes a negative 8. Now this is not true. So whenever we multiply or divide an inequality by a negative, to keep it true, we have to reverse the inequality sign. That's the only difference. And let's just go ahead and do these. So one of the things is keep your variables positive. That way you never have to worry about dividing by a negative. So this is going to be 3. I'm going to transpose this negative x to this other side. And that becomes a positive 3x on that side. A negative x on this side is a positive. And then we have our negative 7 still. We're now going to take the negative 7, bring it over. This will become a 10 is less than or equal to 3x. Divide both sides by 3. And you can write it this way for number 21. X is greater or equal to 10/3. Now in number 22, there's a fraction. So again, you're going to multiply both sides. In this case, there's just one term here by 4. Here the 4's cancel out. Then we're going to get rid of our parenthesis. This becomes 6 minus 2x is less than or equal to 40 now. We're multiplying both sides by 4. Here the 4's cancel out. I distribute 6 minus 2x, 40. Okay. Again, I could transpose this. In fact, let's do that. So now this becomes a positive 2x on this side. This becomes a negative 40, which makes this a negative 34. Divide both sides by 2. I get now this is a negative 17. X is greater or equal to a negative 17. Now notice on this side, if we had left the x's there, this would have been a negative 42. I'm sorry. This would have been a negative on this side, and I would have to divide by a negative 2. I'd have to reverse the sign. Well, in essence, by bringing the 2 over to this side, I, in a sense, reverse the sign. Here it would be an x is less than, now a positive x is greater than. We'll be using that technique in a later chapter. Okay, so again, try to keep your x's positive. That way you don't have to worry. For this one, we're going to have a 5. I'm going to move the x over to this side. I get a positive 3x minus 10. Move the 10 over to this side. I get a 15. Divide both sides by 3. I get x is greater or equal to 5. Now, let me do it the other way too, just to show you. So I have a negative 3x is less than or equal to, going to bring this over. This becomes a negative 15. Now I'm going to divide by a negative. In so doing, I have to reverse the direction of my inequality. So this becomes a positive x is greater or equal to 5, and that's what we had. Okay, now this is a compound one, so let me set this up for you. This is going to be 8 is less than x minus 5 is less than 21. Now here I'm going to use the old technique of just adding 5 to get rid of it to all parts of it. So this is going to be a 13 is less than x is less than 26. So when you have something like this, you want to isolate the x in the middle by adding 5 to all places. And this last one, negative 5 is less than 2x plus 7 is less than or equal to 13. We're going to subtract 7, subtract 7, subtract 7. We then get a negative 12 is less than 2x is less than or equal to, how about a 6? And now we're going to divide everything by 2. So this is a negative 6 is less than x is less than or equal to 3. So not too bad, and this was another 22 minutes or so. Again, the style would be to copy the example down, write it out, and see if you get the answers that we're getting. Okay, but you've done your practice and you quizzed me. You should be ready for your test.